Joseph, the musical king. In a few years, I was his court composer. Isn't that incredible? Night after night, I sat right next to the Emperor of Austria, playing duets with him.
In 1984, Amadeus didn't just win Oscars, it rewrote what a biographical film could be. Behind its powdered wigs and lavish symphonies was a storm of obsession, envy, and genius that mirrored the drama of its subjects. But what audiences never saw were the bizarre, often shocking truths buried beneath the film's elegant perfection. From deleted scenes that changed its meaning, to casting rumors involving rock legends, and even real danger on set, Amadeus remains as strange behind the camera as it is beautiful on screen. So, sit back as we uncover 21 weird facts you never knew about one of cinema's most celebrated masterpieces, a story where madness and music collided to create movie magic. The director's cut deleted a nude scene that changed the film's meaning. When Amadeus premiered in 1984, audiences never saw one of its most controversial sequences: the bedroom scene between Costanza, Mozart's wife, and Antonio Salieri. In the original theatrical release, this moment was completely removed. The reason? The studio feared it would shift the film's emotional balance and push it into scandalous territory. But the 2002 director's cut, released nearly 2 decades later, restored the scene. And suddenly the story took on a darker dimension. In this version, Costanza visits Salieri to show Mozart's manuscripts, desperate for help. What begins as a professional plea turns into a disturbing display of vulnerability, with Salieri demanding that she undress before he'll consider helping. Though the moment stops short of physical contact, the psychological power dynamic exposed Salieri's repressed obsession and envy toward Mozart. Critics argued that the scene made Salieri more human, while others claimed it made him a predator. Milos Forman defended his decision, saying the cut was never about censorship, but about rhythm. Yet for many, the restored footage transformed Amadeus from a story of rivalry into something even more unsettling: a study of lust, morality, and artistic madness. The director's cut reminded the world that even perfection sometimes hides what was deemed too dangerous to show. Tom Hulce's wild on-set behavior frustrated the crew. Tom Hulce's portrayal of Mozart wasn't acting, it was possession. Cast as the eccentric musical genius, Hulce approached the role with method intensity that both impressed and infuriated his colleagues. He stayed in character between takes, speaking in Mozart's high-pitched giggle, improvising lines, and intentionally missing cues to keep co-star F. Murray Abraham off balance. Director Milos Forman encouraged this tension. Abraham, who played Salieri, represented discipline and control, while Hulce embodied chaos. Their dynamic created real friction. According to crew accounts, Hulce would deliberately delay his entrances or change his tempo during piano scenes, forcing Abraham to adapt mid-performance. The result? Genuine frustration that spilled directly onto the screen, most notably during scenes where Salieri's resentment boils beneath polite civility. Cinematographer Miroslav Ondracek recalled how Hulce's spontaneity made shooting unpredictable. "We never knew what he would do next," he said in a 1985 interview. "Sometimes it was magic. Sometimes it was chaos." Abraham later admitted that Hulce's unpredictability gave his own performance more emotional truth, saying, "His madness made my envy believable." Though Forman later apologized for not warning Abraham of Hulce's methods, the creative experiment worked. Their real-life rivalry mirrored their fictional one perfectly, helping Amadeus win 8 Academy Awards, including Best Actor for Abraham. Hulce, meanwhile, accepted his nomination with grace, but reportedly never fully emerged from Mozart's shadow. F. Murray Abraham's possession scene was filmed while he was injured. The haunting scene where Salieri confesses his jealousy of Mozart to a priest stands as one of cinema's greatest performances. But few knew Abraham was in physical and emotional agony while filming it. During production, Abraham suffered from a severe back injury and chronic exhaustion from the grueling 16-hour days. Yet, he refused to halt filming. In his later reflections, Abraham said he felt a kind of possession take over during the confessional scenes. "I wasn't acting," he said. "It was as if Salieri's soul was using mine." The raw emotion that audiences saw was not a performance. It was pain, frustration, and exhaustion merging into art. At one point, he reportedly collapsed after a take, whispering that he couldn't feel his legs. Foreman urged him to rest, but Abraham insisted on completing the sequence that day, terrified the emotional intensity would fade. His face, streaked with real sweat and tears, became the definitive image of a man consumed by envy and guilt. The authenticity of the performance earned Abraham an Academy Award. When he accepted it, he later confessed that part of him still felt bound to Salieri. "He took something from me," he told the New York Times, "but he gave me immortality." In hindsight, the scene's power came from the fragile balance between agony and genius, just like the relationship between Salieri and Mozart themselves. Milos Forman faked parts of Vienna's 18th century look. Though Amadeus appears to be a breathtaking recreation of 18th century Vienna, most of what viewers saw wasn't Vienna at all. The production took place almost entirely in Prague, Czechoslovakia, under tight Cold War regulations. Vienna, now too modernized, couldn't provide the authentic Baroque atmosphere the director needed. Foreman, a Czech native, used his deep knowledge of Prague's architecture to create a convincing illusion. Crews transformed old neighborhoods with removable facades, authentic cobblestone reconstructions, and horse-drawn carriages covering hidden telephone lines. In one case, they disguised an entire row of communist-era shops with false storefronts painted to mimic aristocratic mansions. The local government cooperated, but drew the line when Foreman's team altered historic statues and blocked major streets. There were even reports of state police monitoring the film crew, concerned that the Western production might include anti-socialist messages. Despite the tension, the results were astonishing. Historians visiting the set claimed that they had never seen such dedication to authenticity. Every window pane, wig, and candle holder was historically verified. Ironically, the film's Vienna was more historically accurate than modern Vienna itself. When the film premiered, many Austrians were shocked to learn that most of it was shot in Prague's old theaters and palaces. One Viennese critic joked, "Mozart was born in Salzburg, died in Vienna, and was resurrected in Prague." The deception was cinematic genius. Through illusion, Foreman not only recreated 18th century Europe, he preserved it. The film nearly starred Mick Jagger and David Bowie. It's hard to imagine anyone but Tom Hulce and F. Murray Abraham in Amadeus, but in an alternate timeline, it could have been a rock opera. During the film's early development in the late 1970s, producers briefly flirted with the idea of casting rock icons Mick Jagger and David Bowie as Mozart and Salieri. Jagger had already expressed interest in acting after his performance in Performance, 1970, and Bowie had starred in The Man Who Fell to Earth. Both were fascinated by the myth of Mozart as a wild, misunderstood artist consumed by fame and self-destruction, a theme that resonated with their own careers. According to early studio memos, the concept was to blend classical music with rock opera aesthetics, mirroring the mad genius of 18th century Europe through a modern lens. The idea quickly divided executives. Some saw it as visionary. Others called it madness. Milos Forman rejected the proposal outright, insisting that Amadeus must remain grounded in emotional truth rather than spectacle. "I didn't want pop stars," he said. "I wanted souls." In hindsight, it was the right choice. The film's power came from restraint, not flash. Yet the rumors persisted for years, with tabloids claiming that Jagger and Bowie both attended early script readings in London. Had that version been made, Amadeus might have been remembered as an eccentric experiment rather than an immortal classic. Still, the thought of Bowie's ethereal Salieri and Jagger's unhinged Mozart remains one of Hollywood's strangest what-ifs. Mozart's laugh was entirely invented and terrified viewers. One of the strangest and most memorable aspects of Amadeus is Mozart's shrill, manic laugh. It became instantly recognizable, echoing through theaters long after the credits rolled. But it wasn't based on any documented description of Mozart's real laughter. Instead, Tom Hulce created it himself after reading scattered anecdotes about Mozart's eccentric personality and juvenile humor. Hulce imagined the laugh as a physical manifestation of Mozart's genius, a nervous, uncontrollable reflex that spilled out like his music. Milos Forman encouraged him to exaggerate it until it became unsettling, Some crew members later said the sound gave them chills. Others described it as the sound of madness. Psychologists who analyzed the performance years later suggested the laugh symbolized neurological instability, possibly hinting at conditions like Tourette's syndrome or hypomania, both speculative but dramatically effective. Holst's invention made Mozart feel alien, brilliant, and disturbingly human. Audiences were divided. Some laughed along, others found it haunting. But the giggle became one of cinema's defining character details, a sound so unique it turned into shorthand for genius, unrestrained by sanity. Even today, Holst admits he never rehearsed the laugh. It came naturally once the wig and costume were on. It wasn't planned, he said. It just happened. Salieri wasn't the villain. History made him. For decades, Antonio Salieri was seen as the jealous murderer of Mozart. Amadeus immortalized that myth, but history tells a very different story. In reality, Salieri was one of Mozart's greatest admirers. The two composers moved in the same musical circles, occasionally competed, and even shared students. There's no record of animosity beyond professional rivalry. The myth of Salieri as a poisoner originated from a short play written by Alexander Pushkin in 1830 titled Mozart and Salieri. Rimsky-Korsakov later turned it into an opera, cementing the legend. By the time Peter Shaffer adapted the idea for his stage play and film, fiction had long replaced fact. Historians now know that Salieri, far from hating Mozart, actually taught Mozart's son, Franz Xaver, after his father's death. He also publicly honored Mozart's compositions in Vienna. When Salieri was old and mentally ill, rumors spread that he had confessed to murder. Doctors and friends denied it, but the gossip persisted for centuries. Milos Forman and Schaeffer both admitted the story was symbolic rather than historical. Salieri represented mediocrity's envy of genius, the pain of witnessing brilliance one can never match. In truth, he was no villain at all, just a man trapped by myth. The film's extras were often real Austrian nobility. One of Amadeus's most stunning features is its authenticity, the costumes, the sets, even the faces in the background. But here's what few realize. Many of those faces belong to actual descendants of the Austrian aristocracy. Milos Forman and the costume department sought people who could carry themselves like nobility, and local casting agents in Vienna suggested reaching out to old families with titles tracing back to the Habsburg era. Many accepted out of curiosity or nostalgia. Several extras arrived wearing their own family jewels and heirloom clothing, some dating back 2 centuries. The studio had to insure these items for vast sums, often higher than the entire wardrobe budget. Their presence gave the film an eerie realism, especially during the lavish court scenes. One extra later recalled that the first time he bowed before Emperor Joseph II, he instinctively used the same gesture his ancestors had used for real monarchs. The decision created challenges too. Some nobles refused to follow direction, arguing it was beneath their dignity to be corrected. Still, the authenticity was undeniable. When the film premiered, European audiences were stunned at how real the aristocracy looked. They were because in many cases, they truly were. The court ballroom scene almost burned down. In one of Amadeus's most visually stunning scenes, Mozart conducts an opulent symphony surrounded by candlelit splendor. Yet few realize that this masterpiece of lighting nearly turned into a disaster. To achieve authentic 18th century glow, cinematographer Miroslav Ondřiček used hundreds of real candles instead of electric lights. During one late-night shoot inside the Count Nostitz Theater in Prague, a candle was knocked over during a camera reset. Within seconds, a costume ignited. A quick-thinking crew member smothered the flame with his coat, but the fire spread to nearby drapes before it was contained. No one was hurt, but several period costumes were destroyed and the set suffered minor damage. Foreman later joked, "We wanted realism. We almost got it in ashes." After the scare, the production introduced stricter safety rules, placing hidden metal trays under every candelabra and limiting open flames to short takes. Still, the beauty achieved was worth the risk. Critics later called the lighting a miracle of candlelight cinematography. That night's near disaster became part of the film's legend, proof that sometimes brilliance burns dangerously close to chaos. Milos Forman rejected megastars to cast unknowns. When pre-production for Amadeus began, Hollywood's biggest stars lined up for the lead roles. Dustin Hoffman, Jack Nicholson, and even Al Pacino expressed interest in playing Salieri. Studios pushed for bankable names, but Milos Forman refused. He believed the story's power depended on the audience not recognizing the actors. "I didn't want to see Jack Nicholson playing Salieri," Forman later said. "I wanted to see Salieri." His defiance caused tension with studio executives who feared the film would fail without marquee names. Forman stood his ground, insisting on stage actors instead: F. Murray Abraham and Tom Hulce, both respected but largely unknown. The gamble paid off spectacularly. Their performances were hailed as authentic, raw, and transformative. Abraham's quiet torment and Hulce's manic energy created a chemistry that no Hollywood star could have manufactured. After the Oscars, Forman's decision was hailed as visionary. It reminded filmmakers that authenticity often triumphs over celebrity. The film proved that great art doesn't need famous faces, only great souls to embody it. The real Mozart's skull might appear in the movie. Among the strangest rumors surrounding Amadeus is that a skull used in the film's funeral sequence might have belonged to Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart himself. The claim originated from a 1980s Austrian newspaper article alleging that the production had borrowed a skull from the Mozart Foundation in Salzburg for authenticity. The bone, said to have been kept in a museum since the 19th century, was thought by some researchers to be Mozart's. Although the filmmakers never confirmed the rumor, the prop team did source several real skeletal specimens for the burial scenes. Prague authorities required special permits to handle human remains, leading some locals to suspect that one of those skulls was indeed the Mozart relic. Years later, the International Mozarteum Foundation publicly denied lending the skull, though they admitted that the rumor drew enormous publicity. Genetic tests on the alleged remains in 2006 proved inconclusive, leaving the mystery unresolved. Whether or not the skull was real, the tale perfectly fits the film's haunting tone, life, death, and music blurring together in eerie harmony. The Requiem scene was based on a dream Forman had. The chilling sequence where a dying Mozart dictates his Requiem to Salieri feels too surreal to be scripted, and in a way, it wasn't. Director Milos Forman once revealed that the scene's emotional rhythm was inspired by a dream he had while writing the screenplay. In the dream, he saw two men, one old, one dying, composing music feverishly under candlelight. The dying man's voice trembled, yet the notes came like divine dictation. When he awoke, Forman recognized the imagery as an echo of Mozart and Salieri. He immediately rewrote the Requiem scene to mirror that vision. The intensity of the moment owes much to Forman's direction. He demanded multiple takes where Hulce, soaked in sweat, played half-conscious on the piano while Abraham repeated back every word. Real exhaustion replaced acting. When the scene finally wrapped, the crew fell silent, moved to tears. Forman later said it felt like filming a conversation between heaven and hell. That emotional weight helped make the Requiem sequence one of cinema's most unforgettable depictions of creation meeting mortality. The costumes were sewn with 18th century techniques. When costume designer Theodor Pistek began work on Amadeus, he insisted that authenticity must go beyond appearance. It must feel real. To achieve that, his team used 18th century tailoring methods, complete with hand-stitched seams, whalebone corsets, and gold thread embroidery. No zippers, no shortcuts. Each costume was assembled in Czech workshops using historically documented fabrics. Even the thread was spun to mimic the fragile quality of period material. Actors reported fainting during long shooting days due to the heat and tightness of the garments, especially under stage lights. The result was a triumph of visual texture. The clothing didn't just look authentic, it moved, wrinkled, and shimmered like living history. Forman insisted that no costume appear new, so Pistek ordered artisans to weather the outfits with smoke, candle wax, and dust. The extraordinary detail earned Pistek an Academy Award for Best Costume Design. Today, several of his creations are displayed in Prague's National Museum of Film, preserved as works of art in their own right. Every stitch helped transport audiences into Mozart's world, a place where beauty demanded suffering, even behind the scenes. The laughing crowd scene hid real drunk extras. Few scenes in Amadeus capture the chaos of Mozart's world, like the rowdy crowd sequences at his performances. But that energy wasn't acting. It was intoxication. According to crew accounts, many of the extras were given real wine on set to help loosen their performances and create genuine laughter. Filming stretched late into the night, and the extras' enthusiasm soon got out of hand. By the time cameras rolled, several could barely stand. Instead of halting production, Milos Forman decided to film through the chaos. He later admitted the decision added unexpected authenticity. The blurred smiles and unsteady applause looked exactly like a raucous 18th century audience. The aftermath was less romantic. Crew members spent hours cleaning up spilled wine, and costume staff had to repair dozens of stained garments. Yet, the resulting footage was so compelling that Forman kept it in the final cut. That night became legendary on set, a symbol of Forman's philosophy that realism sometimes comes from surrendering to imperfection. The drunken laughter echoing through Amadeus wasn't rehearsed, it was history repeating itself. The Black Death makeup was real medical inspiration. When audiences saw Mozart dying in bed, pale and sweating, the image was so disturbingly lifelike that doctors praised its accuracy. The film's makeup department achieved that realism by studying medical drawings and autopsy records of plague victims from the 18th century. Makeup designer Paul LeBlanc used real hospital charts detailing late-stage renal failure and meningitis, both possible causes of Mozart's mysterious death. He blended these symptoms into a single visual language: ashen skin, sunken eyes, bluish lips, and sweat glistening under candlelight. The effect was unsettling, yet beautiful, reflecting the fragility of genius at the edge of death. Filming the deathbed scene took over 12 hours, with Tom Hulce remaining motionless for most of it. The crew kept the set chilled to help his breath show visibly in the cold air, adding eerie realism. Test audiences reportedly gasped during the premiere, believing they were watching genuine suffering. Critics later called the sequence an autopsy of genius rendered as art. LeBlanc's attention to detail later earned him an Oscar nomination. It proved that even in death, Amadeus treated its subject with haunting reverence. Abraham and Hulce did not speak off camera for months. The tension between Mozart and Salieri and Amadeus felt so authentic because, behind the scenes, the two lead actors barely spoke. Milos Forman deliberately encouraged emotional distance between Tom Hulce and F. Murray Abraham to preserve the hostility and quiet resentment that defined their characters. According to the crew, Forman even scheduled their scenes apart to keep interactions minimal, except when filming. Hulce, immersed in Mozart's manic energy, stayed cheerful and unpredictable, while Abraham remained solemn and detached. When the two finally met on set for shared scenes, the contrast between their personalities was electric. Abraham later admitted he avoided Hulce intentionally, saying he didn't want to like him too much because it would undermine Salieri's envy. Hulce, for his part, respected the distance, claiming that he could feel Abraham's quiet intensity whenever they locked eyes on camera. This psychological divide heightened the realism of their performances. In key moments, like the dictation of the Requiem, their tension feels palpable, almost painful. They rarely exchanged words during filming. But when production ended, the silence finally broke. Abraham congratulated Hulce, saying, "I couldn't have done it without you." That rare fusion of method discipline and emotional restraint produced some of the greatest chemistry ever captured on screen. Mozart's manuscripts in the film were accurate reproductions. Every time the camera lingered on a sheet of Mozart's music in Amadeus, it wasn't just a prop, it was an exact reproduction of his real handwriting. The production obtained special permission from the Austrian National Library to copy several of Mozart's original scores. Archivists provided high-resolution microfilm prints of works like The Marriage of Figaro and Don Giovanni. Czech calligraphers then spent weeks recreating the notes by hand on aged parchment, matching every ink blot and smudge. Even the mistakes, the crossouts, hurried lines, and marginal notes were preserved exactly as in the originals. Milos Forman insisted on this authenticity because the film hinged on Salieri's awe when seeing Mozart's manuscripts. When Abraham gasps, it was as if he was taking dictation from God. He wasn't acting. Those were real masterpieces before him. The attention to historical precision was so meticulous that when the film premiered, several musicologists praised Amadeus as a visual archive of Mozart's genius. The manuscripts later toured alongside the film's costumes in exhibitions across Europe. For a movie about the divine nature of art, those papers were sacred relics, and the filmmakers treated them as such. The film revived Mozart's popularity worldwide. Before Amadeus was released, classical music was struggling to capture the mainstream imagination. That changed almost overnight. Following the film's 1984 premiere, global sales of Mozart's works skyrocketed by nearly 500%. Record stores across Europe and the United States reported selling out of symphony collections for the first time in decades. Music publishers and orchestras credited the film with sparking a Mozart revival. Suddenly, young audiences were attending symphony performances, and universities added new music appreciation courses. The Amadeus soundtrack topped classical charts for years and even entered pop charts in the US and Japan. The ripple effect extended far beyond the screen. Classical radio stations saw listener increases, and in 1985, Mozart's bicentennial year, sales of his recordings reached an all-time high. Music critics began calling it the Amadeus effect. For a generation raised on rock and disco, the film transformed Mozart from a dusty historical figure into a living, rebellious genius. His laughter, his chaos, and his brilliance suddenly felt modern again. No other biographical film in history has had such a profound cultural impact on the appreciation of music itself. The movie's soundtrack won Grammys and outsold pop albums. The success of Amadeus extended far beyond the cinema. Its soundtrack, recorded by the Academy of St. Martin in the fields under Sir Neville Mariner, became a global phenomenon. It spent over a decade at the top of the Billboard classical chart and sold more than 6.5 million copies, a record for any classical album at the time. In 1985, it won 4 Grammy Awards, including Best Classical Album. Remarkably, the soundtrack even outsold pop records in several countries, briefly surpassing albums by Bruce Springsteen and Prince on European charts. What made it so appealing was accessibility. Mariner chose recordings that highlighted Mozart's emotional range rather than his complexity, making symphonies and concertos resonate with new listeners. The film's timing coincided perfectly with the emerging home audio boom, further fueling its reach. Critics hailed the soundtrack as a gateway to classical music for millions. Schools and universities even used it in their curricula. To this day, it remains one of the highest-selling classical soundtracks in history. Through Amadeus, Mozart's music wasn't just resurrected, it became timeless pop culture. Amadeus inspired a generation of composers and filmmakers. Beyond its awards and accolades, Amadeus left a legacy of inspiration. Countless modern composers, directors, and playwrights have cited it as a defining influence. Hans Zimmer once said the film taught him that music is storytelling, while Lin-Manuel Miranda credited Amadeus for shaping his understanding of artistic rivalry and creative obsession. In film schools across the world, Amadeus became required viewing for screenwriting and direction. Its structure, a story told through confession and envy, was adopted by filmmakers from Darren Aronofsky to Damien Chazelle. Both Black Swan and Whiplash owe subtle debts to its psychological portrait of perfectionism. Even pop culture absorbed its imagery. Fashion designers reintroduced 18th century-inspired styles in the mid-1980s, and MTV used classical motifs influenced by the movie's aesthetic. More importantly, the film reminded artists that genius can be tragic, and that beauty often blooms from conflict. Amadeus didn't just celebrate Mozart's music, it exposed the painful humanity behind it, inspiring creators to chase authenticity over perfection. Decades later, its echo still lingers in every story about obsession, art, and immortality. The film's opening scene was inspired by a real attempted suicide. The haunting opening of Amadeus, an aged Antonio Salieri attempting suicide and confessing his murder of Mozart, wasn't pure invention. It was rooted in a real incident from Salieri's final years. In 1823, at age 73, the historical Salieri suffered from severe dementia and depression. He attempted to take his own life by slitting his throat, but survived. In the aftermath, rumors spread through Vienna that he had confessed to poisoning Mozart. Doctors who treated him denied that he ever said such a thing, but the story stuck, morphing over time into a myth of guilt and divine punishment. Playwright Peter Shaffer, who wrote the Amadeus stage play, found that fragment of history irresistible. He used it as the frame for Salieri's fictional confession, turning rumor into dramatic truth. When Milos Forman adapted it for film, he expanded the sequence into an operatic prologue, one that plunges viewers into madness and memory within minutes. That real moment of desperation became the emotional doorway into the story. It gave the rivalry its tragic anchor, reminding audiences that Amadeus was not about murder, but about the soul of a man crushed by envy. What began as a misunderstood headline from 1823 became one of the most unforgettable openings in cinema history. Amadeus remains a masterpiece about the cost of creation and the torment of human jealousy. Behind its elegance lie stories of exhaustion, obsession, and genius that nearly consumed everyone involved. Milos Forman's vision blurred myth and history until the two became inseparable, just as Mozart and Salieri remain forever intertwined in legend. 40 years later, the film still resonates not because it tells the truth of history, but because it reveals a deeper truth about humanity itself, that envy, admiration, and genius are threads of the same divine fabric. In the end, Amadeus isn't just about Mozart's brilliance, it's about the painful beauty of those who can recognize greatness but will never possess it.